Good afternoon. I'm Ralph Newell, and welcome to In the Margins. Today's guest is Dr. Robin DiAngelo, affiliate associate professor of education at the University of Washington, and also author of White Fragility: Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism, which was released in June of 2018 and debuted on the New York Times bestseller list, where it did remain for over 3 years. So before we get into things, Robin, I wanted to sort of play a word association game, ask you a question.
Okay.
Which you hear. This was a new word, new series of words, I'll say, that I just learned or heard about last week, and I just wanted to get your reaction to it. So what do you think?
You want a one-word response, or do you want me to like riff a little bit?
Hey, whatever hits you. You know.
All right.
And I'm assuming you've heard this. If you hadn't, then I'll definitely give you the background. But what do you think when you hear the words involuntary relocation?
Oh, well, there's an immediately, you saw it, like the eyes roll. I think it's profoundly minimizing. I think it's a perversion of history and reality. I think we need to just call it what it is. It's gaslighting, it's dishonest, it's disingenuous. And I've heard it. It's suggested that we use it in place of slavery. And I actually think enslavement is preferable to slavery, or an enslaved person versus a slave. That is not inherently your identity, and enslaved is active. This is this thing that is happening to you that is being perpetrated on you.
Yeah, no, no, you're right. And I had the same eye roll and expression. And when I first heard it, and then I was out with some friends yesterday, 4th of July, mixed group of friends. When I say mixed, I mean in the sense of our racial identity, and it came up, and not that we had different reactions, but I felt like just our tolerance level for it was different, if that makes any sense.
It does make sense, yeah.
And it was just like, and I was like, you just got to call it what it is. I mean, why give it a new name? It doesn't change history.
Well, yeah,
that's what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, Ibram Kendi makes a really great point when people ask him, well, won't learning about enslavement cause white children to feel guilt? And, he poses this question: why do you assume the white child can only identify with the slaveholder, right? Slavery couldn't have ended without white people ending it. So there are abolitionists for us to identify with. Why don't you teach about, all of the effort it took and all of the alliances from white people that it took?
No, that's a very good point. And you brought up Ibram. We at Diverse like to take credit for Ibram. He did his internship with us when he was.
Oh, sweet.
So I'm just so proud of of how far he's come and the work he's doing. But for our listeners, who listen in week after week, last week we talked with Jacqueline, Dr. Jacqueline Ballalore, about how our forefathers, through laws, policies, and practices and their attitudes, set out to divide and conquer Blacks and lower class whites. And so I'm reading, you say about yourself that you grew up poor and white. So, and that you felt your class was more visible to you than your race, at least initially. So tell me how that manifested, and when did you start realizing being white was different than being Black or brown?
Even though I grew up in poverty and knew the humiliation of poverty, the shame of poverty, the hunger of poverty, I still racially swam with the current, not against it. When you swim against the current, you're acutely aware that the current exists. It's like a fish, right? And when you swim with it, you're working, you're struggling, but your efforts are not facing the resistance of the current. And really nothing about the trajectory of my life would have me understanding the power of my whiteness, except that I fell into a job that I wasn't qualified for, that I was very naive about. Diversity trainer. I saw an announcement for a diversity trainer back in the 90s. It's the language we used at the time. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, of course I'm qualified for this. I'm so nice. I'm so open. This is just a matter of being open-minded. And I was in for the most profound learning of my entire life. That's when I really realized, oh, your experience of poverty would have been profoundly different if you were not white. I don't know how any white person can look me in the eyes and say to be Black and poor and white and poor are the same experience. And so I get frustrated with this move over to, the real oppression is class, and let's talk about class, and then everything else will, go away. And I think that's disingenuous. I think that's a way to get race off the table. White people do tend to have an urgency to get race off the table, and whatever works, we'll use it. But even if you think of the lowest of the low in terms of hierarchy of status in employment, which in my mind would be a coal miner.
Right.
Okay. Well, who got the most dangerous positions in the coal mine? The Black coal miners, right? Mm-hmm. Any form of oppression, you're going to also have racism cutting across it. So which queer people are the most susceptible to violence? Black and, Black queer people, Black trans women, and so forth. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, how do you think, though, it would have been different for you growing up poor if you were not white? I mean, what do you see as the differences?
Yeah. Well, first of all, my efforts to overcome poverty paid off in the sense that I wasn't also dealing with racism. Mm-hmm. And so at least I belong racially in virtually any setting I was in. So I was what you would call a non-traditional student. I graduated with my BA as a 34-year-old single mother. I felt like an imposter and an outsider class-wise, but race was just a non-issue. Nobody standing in front of that classroom looking out would have singled me out as somebody lower than anybody else based on my class, right? A student of color, I mean, you could be Oprah Winfrey and go to hail a cab. You could be one of the richest people in the world and go to hail a cab. If you're Black, you can expect to be discriminated against. It doesn't, I mean, it helps you, I suppose, navigate racism if you have some economic resources, for sure, but it doesn't render it moot.
Right. No, it's interesting. I mean, because honestly, the way I grew up, I honestly thought I grew up poor. And I think it was because my parents always said we were poor, but in hindsight, I realized we were not, we probably were, at a minimum, a middle-class family. But they always say we were poor. Every time we ask for anything, they say, we can't afford that. We can't get that, So I'm just thinking about my childhood and growing up. Okay, so I thought I was poor. And then I'm reading where you talk about, I'll say white people, if you will, growing up racially illiterate. And I'm also like, well, how could that be? I mean, race was always in the forefront in my home. And I don't mean that in a negative way. My parents didn't talk about, white people this or Latinos that. It's just, it was just always in the construct, just with the way just life is, the way society bombards us with the imagery, the news, information like that. I'm just wondering how can you grow up in a racially illiterate home? Like, how does that happen?
Oh, I mean, I think it's a hallmark of white homes, is that we certainly are not educated on our racial history. We know that. And the efforts that are at play today will make it literally illegal for us to be educated on our racial history. So we don't learn anything in school except the most simplistic romanticization of Rosa Parks and Ruby Bridges and so forth, right? Mm-hmm. Martin Luther King with I Have a Dream. There are taboos about talking about race. in white culture. For most white people, it's just a non-issue. That might be almost incomprehensible for you, but it's just a non-issue. And everywhere you look, you might be poor as a white person, but everywhere you look, your image, your racial image is reflected back at you. I mean, I'm just going to say it. God himself is represented as white. Jesus is white. All the heroes and heroines are white, the books you read. And if it isn't white, if they aren't white, they're always marked as not white. So the default is so deep and so taken for granted. And all of these things, and this is harder to admit to, but there's not any way you cannot internalize a sense of superiority. I mean, we might have been racially illiterate, but we knew it was better to be white. Who doesn't know it's better to be white? Come on. I just don't buy that anybody doesn't know on some basic level it's better in society to be white. And so all of those things allow us, right? We look at inequality and how do we make sense of it? Well, we make sense of it as we have what we have because we deserve to have what we have, right? And they don't.
Right. I was talking about last night, some of the folks that I was hanging out with here, my neighbors, waiting on fireworks, et cetera. Mixed group. I'm trying to think. It was one Asian lady, two Black men, a Korean woman. No, so it was two Asian, two white women. And we got into this conversation about the things we talked about growing up in our homes, because the conversation actually was based on started off on and I forgot the term already, involuntary relocation. Yeah. That's where the conversation started, and about, okay, this is the 4th of July. What does freedom mean, and all of this. But what was common, and you said it just a second ago, between my friends that were white, talked about in their homes growing up, they said they didn't use the word taboo, but they basically said to a person, oh, we just didn't talk about that. We did not talk about it. So anything about race, it was almost as if we don't talk about it, then we don't have to deal with it. That was my take on it. And so what does your research say about it? That
absolutely, it serves us to be illiterate. This isn't a benign or neutral, this isn't an innocent illiteracy. It takes some effort to push it away, to work to not see. And there's another piece here, which is the power of segregation. We live segregated lives. Most white children grow up with no authentic relationships across race, and no one conveying to them that there's any value. To me, actually, the deepest message of white superiority that I can access within myself is that there's no loss to me in not knowing or loving Black people. That I could go from cradle to grave, as most white people do, with no authentic relationships with Black people. And not only have I never been given the message there's anything lost in that, but in fact, I gained status. The wider the space, the more value it has. I mean, what is a good school anyway? Come on. What is a good neighborhood? Where are we when we're shocked that happened here? These are really powerful messages. And what does it mean for my parents to tell me everyone's equal? If they did, I didn't actually have that kind, but let's say I did have that kind. To say everyone's equal, but live separate. There's a lot going on under the surface. And now add your psychosocial development and my psychosocial development in the context of all of that going on for me and for you. You have to see, you actually have to know my reality from a very early age and navigate my reality in a way that I can be seen as qualified to do or lead anything with no understanding of your reality and no interest in understanding your reality. That's some deep stuff.
It is. I'm sitting here as we're talking. I'm just reminded of the book To Kill a Mockingbird, right? I read it in school. I thought it was great, if you will. In other words, it was one of the books that we had to read that when I finished it, I wasn't like, oh, this was just terrible. So the play, To Kill a Mockingbird, is live here and now at the Kennedy Center in DC, starring Richard Thomas. So I knew my daughters had read it in school, and I asked them, hey, do you guys want to go see it at the theater? And they both resoundingly no, like, no. And I was just like, what are you talking about? This is like an American classic, blah, blah, blah. And, they really got into explaining to me, that they felt this was, a white savior
Yeah.
kind of thing, and just, people putting this person on a pedestal to get rid of guilt, et cetera, et cetera. So I did not refute that what they said at all, and I actually thought about it. So it was a different thing for me. And I'm saying all this to say, you're talking about growing up white, how, of course, everything white is good. That's what you are taught. But not only, what I'm saying is, not only are you as a white person taught that, me as a person of color and other people of color are also taught those same things. Those sort of, you said it a second ago, good neighborhood or bad neighborhood.
Right.
That's a code word sometimes for Black neighborhood, but when it's bad.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so I, as an African American, have gotten caught up with some of those things in life, of taking what the media tells us and making it the reality. And so if I can succumb to it, if you will, I see it being very easy for someone who's white.
Yeah. And once you internalize that, and how could you not, you don't really have to do anything aggressive to keep you in your place, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we all play our parts. I mean, this is all forms of oppression. Women have that internalized at a very early age, their place, right? I'm sure you've seen women who resist feminism, and it's a parallel process. No one misses the message, but the impact of that message is really different, right? Mm-hmm. The impact on me is, at least by race, I can do anything I want, go anywhere I want, say anything I want. And you probably have a constant, be careful, watch out, where am I? Is it safe here? So I'm gonna move myself forward, and you may move. And I don't mean that you're holding yourself back. Please, mm-hmm. I hope nobody misunderstands that.
No.
But this is how we get set up into our places.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I was thinking about that privilege, that there's things that I have privilege in as a man, versus you as a woman. But overall, it was interesting to hear you say that you feel like you can go anywhere, do anything. Again, I'll keep going back to this group I was at last night, and we kind of were talking about the gender side of it, where it was different. My Chinese woman was talking about places she did not feel safe going as a woman. And the white woman was almost like, why would you not feel safe going there? I'd go there, but I didn't think about it until just now, listening to what you were saying, that, it's just a different mindset.
Yeah. So, notice I put the qualifier racially, right? Mm-hmm. But I think one of the most nuanced and complicated intersections is white women and Black men. So you may have you're sexist and you're domineering in your home, but on the street, I actually think Black men are among the very most vulnerable, as we see in the shooting yet again that just happened. So it's not parallel that you're a man, so you have male privilege. You're right. A Black man. And so it's contextual where you have privilege.
Oh, absolutely. Totally agree. Totally agree. Moving on here, I just want to talk about some things, again, to help educate our audience here. You've been credited, I'm not sure, but I'm going to give you the credit, at least I read it, with coining the phrase white fragility. So I've heard many people define it. So I would like to, as they say, get it from the horse's mouth. What does white fragility mean, and why is it important for us to talk about it and understand it?
Oh, I appreciate you asking. And I did coin the term. Okay. And originally in an academic article back in 2011, so over 10 years ago. And, in academia, you have to do academia speak. So you make it as difficult to understand as possible. I know how to do it. I've been trained in it. I don't enjoy it. So I always cringe when I see people define it because they're pulling from that article. And I don't think it's as clear as then I tried to move it over and make it in the book. So basically, the fragility part is meant to capture how little it takes to cause white people to just melt down in defensiveness or anger or denial. You even said, you kind of put a qualifier around white people, if I can say that, right? Even saying white people will get some white people extremely upset, right? Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't take much. I mean, please, really? That's going to cause a meltdown, but it does. It's not fragile, however, in its impact, because behind that defensiveness and that hurt and that anger and those tears is marshaled the entire weight of the institutions, which backs that white person. If there's a dispute between us and I'm crying, I mean, this is what Amy Cooper was depending on. And in a rare situation, it didn't happen for her. But same with Derek Chauvin, right? Behind them is the expectation. Those are pretty bald moves they're making, because on some level, they're relying on a very predictable, reliable dynamic, which is the institutions are going to be behind you. And so it functions really powerfully to deflect the challenge, right? So you challenge me in my position. You suggest that my being white has meaning. You suggest that I have advantage, and I get very upset until you back off. And you do back off, probably more often than not. Why? Because things tend to get worse, not better, when you challenge me. It's almost like a form of bullying. Seriously, it doesn't have to be conscious, but that's how it functions. I'm going to bully and punish you, back off, so we can get back into what's comfortable and familiar to me. My racial equilibrium you've thrown it off by piercing the veil, if you will. And that's intolerable to me. And so I'm going to get back in my place, and you're going to get back in yours. Have you seen it? Have you felt it?
I really have, and I was talking to Dr. Badalore about this just last week. The night before she and I talked, I had a neighbor that was over, and we were talking, and she was telling me, and she knows the work I do at Diverse, and that I do diversity training things, and she was saying that she went to one at her organization. And it was voluntary, so it wasn't like it was even, mandated by the organization. And so she's not a person that I would have ever labeled as defensiveness of whiteness or racist or anything like that. One of the most open people that I know. But she came out of that training upset, angry, like the whole nine yards. When I finished talking with her, I realized that she felt misunderstood and attacked in that training. And I couldn't say anything about it because I wasn't there. But I know people who do this work. And I was like, well, did the trainer say you did this? I mean, I was really trying to, get to the core of where you were feeling this angst, and where I could ask questions. I really didn't get good answers. So now I'm talking, thinking about this. So where do you think this defensiveness or this response, comes from? Because I know she wasn't attacked, but she felt attacked.
I think Okay. And of course, I also acknowledge I wasn't there. So we're not talking about this individual person, but this is a familiar pattern. And often the expectation that she has is she's going to be affirmed. She's going to go in there and feel real good about herself and how open she is. And she's not one of the bad guys. So what I call that good, bad binary, which is how most white people learn to understand racism. It's very simple. You're either racist or you're not.
Right.
And if you're racist, you're bigoted and prejudiced and mean. You intentionally seek to hurt people. And if you're not racist, you're good and you would never hurt anybody. And you're not part of the problem. Okay. So I don't know that you could have set up a more effective way to ensure not only that the system of racism is protected, but that white people are going to be defensive. Right. So she probably saw herself as one of the good ones, if you will, progressive and open-minded. And they probably pushed, they probably challenged, they probably said things like, everybody breathe, all white people have institutional power. All white people have absorbed racist ideology that says they're superior. I would say the same thing. There's no way you can miss that message. And she just felt profoundly challenged in her identity because her identity rested on a very different framework. And it was intolerable, right? She didn't have the capacity or the skills or the framework. And 25 years ago, if you'd said to me, well, Robin, I think you're racist, or what you just said to me was racist, or had a racist impact, or however you wanted to say it to me, I would have freaked out. I would have heard you basically saying I'm an immoral person. And at a conscious level, there's just no way I would see myself that way, or even understand why what I said was racist. And sadly, many of us are not very curious, right? Instead of saying, oh, help me understand how that was racist, because I didn't understand that. What we do is just like, absolutely not. We set this is the irony. We set ourselves up as the arbiters of whether racism is real or not. And we are the least qualified to understand it. We're the least motivated to understand it, especially if it implicates us.
Yeah.
So, look, I'm in this field. I've been to some trainings I think are terrible. And yet, I still try to find something of value and something that I can, make sense of and use. And if nothing else, I learn how I don't want to do it.
But, it was interesting, in my conversations, not to belabor her, but we were talking about this because she was wanting to be an ally, right? How can I, how can I play my role? What can I do? So that was the goal, objective, if you will, going into it. Now coming out of it, I almost felt like, now she's kind of going to be standoffish. Do you know what I mean? Like that's not as important to me as it was before, because now I feel like I'm being attacked. But I was saying to her, I said, in order for you to do this, I said, I think you are going to have to go through that, some type of self-examination, to see why you felt that way. I said, I can't speak as to how you were misunderstood or attacked because I wasn't there. But I said, to me, just because you felt that way and me being familiar with this work, I think you took it personal. So
yeah, and that's that humility piece, right? Like what if she wasn't misunderstood at all? She doesn't understand why what she said or did was racially problematic. And what she doesn't have is the humility to try to even a basic kind of curiosity. Like, what if they understood me perfectly? They even understood what I meant, but I don't understand how I was drawing from a fundamentally kind of racist paradigm. That's such a different orientation. And even the ally. See, I do think she wanted to be affirmed as an ally, but ally is not a fixed position. And I am the least qualified to determine myself as an ally. Like, that's for you to decide. I often use this example. If you've ever seen a man wearing a shirt T-shirt that says, "This is what a feminist looks like." Not very often, but I have seen it before.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
And I have two thoughts. One, wow, that's pretty brave. That's thought one. Thought two is, yeah, I'll be the judge of that, buddy. Right. Because, there are men who call themselves feminists who I do not think are feminists. So that's something in any given moment. And sometimes I am more allied and others less. And so her framework. I'm wondering if she read White Fragility or if that would be a good one for her.
No, she hasn't. But I was actually going to send it to her. You talk about being racist. I mean, do you think that all of us have racism in us, or biases or tendencies?
There is no human objectivity. So absolutely everybody has socially learned biases about social others. So if you and I were in a workshop and we were doing an exercise and we had these categories, Indian woman, Chinese woman, Asian man, gypsy, which is not a good word, but Roma, you and I, we'd just fill in the chart, right? We'd brainstorm all the stereotypes. We'd have no problem understanding them. You know what I mean? We all absorb that. And the irony is that while you can't help absorbing it, refusing to look at it can only keep it in place. You can't resist it if you won't acknowledge it, right? So we've all absorbed the messages of white superiority, right? But the impact and the position is so different that I reserve the word racism to talk about white people's racial bias. Your racial bias, I just call racial bias. You could on site dislike all white people until they proved you different. And that would be biased. I think actually would be kind of smart, right? I mean, given our history, how about we earn some trust here? But nonetheless, we could technically say that's biased. You don't know me. But even it doesn't hurt me. It can't hurt me in the way that my bias towards you can hurt you, because there's a deep history and legacy, and all of the institutions are going to back my bias. We just, if we don't reserve some language to acknowledge the profundity of that difference in impact, then I think we just trivialize it. And the example I often use is women's suffrage. I mean, women could hate men in 1919, but they couldn't systematically deny them their civil rights across the entire nation. But men who could also hate women and could systematically deny them their civil rights. What was the difference? They both hated each other. Right. Well, this group had control of the institutions and could disseminate their hatred or bias, whatever, in profoundly different ways.
Wow. That's interesting. I mean, just as a sidebar that you talk about suffrage, we're here in Northern Virginia, right outside DC, and like literally not even a mile from my house, the suffrage memorial just opened up. So it's and I was walking by there yesterday, and there were I shouldn't call them protesters, but there were women out there, holding signs of saying, basically we're going back to this pre-suffrage time, with some of the Supreme Court.
Well, that's true, but I always think it's important for me to acknowledge which women were granted access finally in 1920 by which men. So white men basically granted white women. Right. Oh, absolutely. And it wasn't until the Voting Rights Act. So white women white suffragettes don't have a great history.
Oh yeah.
Across race, themselves.
It's funny you say that, because when they were building that, I had a similar conversation with someone about that. With it being so close, we're always, it's front and center. But anyway, we digress. So I was reading on your website, and for our audience here, which is robindiangelo.com. I was reading your accountability statement, and there were two areas there that really piqued my interest, and I'll start with the first one, where you talked about forming white affinity groups, and I was like, well, they already have the Klan. What is she talking about? But I know that's not what you meant. So Can you talk to our audience about the importance and why you want to form white affinity groups?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. I don't think anyone ever brings that up, but and I just finished co-writing a handbook for leading white affinity groups, and a colleague is writing a handbook for leading people of color affinity groups. Comes out in July. So the ultimate goal is that we come together across these divides, but white people are not in great shape to do that. We're racially illiterate. Most of us can't even answer the question, what does it mean to be white? And then you throw us in a room together and say, let's talk about race and racism. And a lot of damage gets done. I've just heard countless people of color just say those are awful discussions. And white people are fragile, and they're saying ignorant things, and people of color are being subjected to it or having to teach. So white affinity group is just one tool in the toolbox. You notice how I'm being really careful, because white people, this is the irony, white people for the most part live segregated lives every day. But with not remarkable at all, just happened to be. But the moment you say we are going to separate intentionally by race in order to work on our racism, why are we separating?
Right.
But it's a tool in the toolbox to get us in better shape to come back together, to do the personal work, and the kind of work that people of color often don't want to be subjected to, right? Like you're glad we're having insights and breakthroughs, but sometimes they're so basic and simplistic that it's frustrating to think, oh my God, that's like a huge breakthrough for you. Where are we if that put the light bulb on, right? So we do that separately, and then come back together. Make sense?
Yeah, no. And the other area, and you alluded to this earlier, and it was I don't want to say it was eye-opening, like I didn't know that, but it was just sort of confirming. I'll say that it was confirming, and that was building authentic relationships. You were talking about the dynamics of, are you really a friend, or do you really have a relationship when there's an imbalance in the roles? If you are the employer versus an employee, kind of thing. So, because you'll hear a person, oh, I have this great friend, that's Black, but their roles are so different as to how they're together. Do they really, in fact, have an authentic relationship?
Right.
So, talk about that and what it means to build an authentic relationship, and then how it would help in this work.
Well, an authentic relationship is, one, sustained. Two, within the context of structural racism, you're still within that context on equal footing. So I'm not your boss. I really don't think authentic relationships could happen when I have that direct power over your life. So we're not in that relationship. You don't work for me. And it's sustained over time, and we do talk about racism, and you can challenge me and give me feedback, and I don't go away and give up and just say you have a personal issue, right? So it's personal what you just told me, but it's not personal in the sense that I'm a product of my culture. So we're in it for the long haul, and we don't avoid talking about race. When you have a cross-racial friendship and you never talk about race, I just wonder about that. I wonder about the consciousness or awareness of both those parties. And look, not all people of color have a critical consciousness. I mean, Clarence Thomas, excuse me, I had something in my throat. All right. Not all people of color have a critical consciousness, but maybe we're not talking about race because I've given many signals to you that you can't go there, or you went there once and I didn't respond well, and so you don't go there again. If that's the case, on some level, it's not authentic, because you're not going to really show yourself to me or be vulnerable with me. So those are some of the criteria I think that allows authenticity.
I think about children, like I think about my own children. Early on in their K-12 life, I felt like they had some authentic friendships. And I say that, I mean, across race.
Mm-hmm.
And they really didn't, see color. But, they started to later. And I think about how many of those have survived that they still have. And I think about myself and how many of those relationships that I had. I mean, when I went to school, schools were integrated. But very few of my white friends, let's say K through 5. It's interesting. Some of my best friends in K through 5, were some white boys that by the time we got to middle school and high school, we were totally opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And I don't even know how it happened. I mean, I know how it happened, but what I'm saying, there was nothing on my part to change that. I just realized we were no longer together, if you will.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of 2 books. One, of course, is Beverly Tatum's classic, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria?
Yeah.
But also, even I just saw him in town. How to Raise an Anti-Racist, even his new book, where he looks at the different developmental stages. And he does talk about the research that shows, by three, they see it, they're aware of it, but they're learning not to talk about it. Right. What I noticed, and this isn't based necessarily on research, it's just something I've noticed in my years of doing this work, that when you get closer to dating age, that's when it starts to change. That's also when parents start to get a little more uncomfortable. It's very sweet when they're little, and then it gets a little more threatening in a different kind of way. So I just wonder how much of that is in there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, you're right. And good segue. You're talking about how many years you've been doing this work. And, you've been studying and researching, this topical area for, well over 20 years. And, and just reading, gosh, you seem to be a lightning rod to me, I mean, even you've gone as far as to, I'll say, and I don't even think you needed to defend yourself, if you will, on your webpage. But, you've had people from the far right try to discredit you. And then you had people who you would think you're allies with who, want to say that you're a profiteer. So how do you respond to that criticism and continue to do this work?
Oh, man. I mean, let's just start with anyone who's out front on race is going to be a lightning rod in this country, right? I absolutely expect it from the right. While it can be threatening, because I have had my home vandalized, I've had death threat, yes, all of that. It doesn't hurt me. It does hurt me when it comes from the left, because that's kind of where I see my alliance. But my accountability statement is me speaking to it. I think that with social media, I'm not a real person to them. I represent something, and I think a lot of pain and resentment and is projected onto that thing. If you knew my history, if you saw how long I've been doing, if you read my publications, I've never written about anything but either racism or social oppression. A lot of people you notice that are famous, that are starting to be famous on this, and you look at their CVs, they have no history of being committed to this. It's just now they are. And I've been committed to it long before I was paid for it. I've given my work away for decades. I've taken a lot of crap. And because of that, I got very effective. And I do bring something that's different. I don't think white people will ever understand racism if we're not listening to people of color and Black people. We couldn't. But I have a piece you don't have. I'm an insider. And you just can't know what that is any more than I can know what it is to be an insider to masculinity, right?
Right.
And I can name it in a way that's harder to deny. Right. And so the goal isn't that you only listen to me. The goal is that I open you up so they listen to you. And I think I've been really effective at it. But there's a lot of social media, just people enjoy being critical too. I mean, this is not to say that I can't do better. Let me just ask you one last thing, and then I'll see what you're smiling about. I love Loretta Ross. She's a professor at Smith. She's a Black woman.
Mm-hmm.
And she says we need to do better at differentiating between a problematic ally and an adversary.
Mm-hmm.
All allies are problematic. I'm problematic. I'm not the enemy, right? Sometimes I think to myself, why aren't you going after Tucker Carlson? Really?
Right. No, I totally hear you. And what I was smiling about when you were, I thought you were searching for a word. I was going to say, oh, you mean the haters.
Yeah, there you go.
That's, I don't care what your walk of life is. When people reach, a higher standard, than the others, and they separate themselves from the crowd, you're going to have haters. You're going to have the crabs in the barrel and all that. So, it was not my forum here today to try and criticize you, but to elevate what you're doing so that we can have, the critical conversations that need to be had on campus, in this topical area. And some of the things that I get from institutions that bring us in or that we talk to, some of the problem maybe is not the right word, but let's just say an issue is getting white people on board, whether it's, they just haven't had skin in the game. Some, I'm not saying all, I'm not trying to blanket it, but some, we can't get them to the table. And some of those people you need at the table to get change. And so, they're looking at ways to do that. So from what I've read and some of the things that I've seen, I wanted to talk with you because I think you have some tools and answers and resources that people can put in their tool belts to use. So
thank you. I appreciate that. I didn't feel at all criticized. I mean, you gave me an opportunity to speak to it, So.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, no, I definitely wasn't going to try and criticize, but we are here at the end of time here. So just a couple of things I wanted to end with. We started doing this in the last couple of podcasts of having you complete the sentence. So I got 2 sentences I want you to complete, sort of in regards to what we've talked about. First one is, it's not a white person's fault that
society is unequal by race, but it is a white person's responsibility to address it.
Right. Okay. And this is very generic, go where you want, but just white people need to be blank.
Way more humble and open and curious and much less apathetic and resentful and silent and complicit.
Okay. All right. Again, thank you so much for your time. Dr. DiAngelo, do you have any other closing thoughts for our audience?
Yeah. If you Google me, you'll come across all kinds of controversies, right? And there was one that happened where Coca-Cola took a soundbite out of context.
I saw that.
It went crazy on the right, and it was be less white.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I was saying be less white. And so, but let me add the part they took away, right? Okay. And so that doesn't mean be more Italian or German, be more ethnic. To be less white simply means be less oppressive in the way that whiteness is oppressive. So be less apathetic and silent and complicit and be more open. It's another way of saying be less white, again, in the ways that whiteness is oppressive. So
no, I saw that, and I didn't want to bring it up as I didn't want us to go down a rabbit hole with that, but I do appreciate you bringing that up and clarifying that. And to be honestly, that was my assumption of where you were going with that when I read that. But again, when you take things out of context, it just
oh yeah,
especially in the social media era that we live in, it can just get legs of its own.
It's like toxic masculinity. If I said be less masculine, I would mean in the ways that it can be toxic.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it got me. Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeted me, and so did Don Jr. So hey, I've made it.
Good. I don't want to say good company, but you out
Yeah.
there. Okay. All right. Thank you again.